Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar by Michael Palmer. My name is Pat Bono, president of New York Bee Wellness, which is an educational, grassroots, charitable 501c3 organization. Its mission is to educate small-scale, sign-liner, beginning beekeepers. We do have a YouTube site with past in-person and online presentations. We also conduct statewide surveys twice a year for non-migratory beekeepers in New York State, and 2021 will be our 7th year of collecting data. New York Bee Wellness also sends out newsletters several times a year. Okay, well, thank you, Mike, very much for attending and presenting this. We have a really big audience today, this evening. You're on.
I see that, 254, cool.
So far.
Yeah, I see some Virginia and Ontario and gosh, all over. It's great. So anyway, this is a presentation I did for the National Honey Show in England, and they wanted it pre-recorded. And it's a talk about what our annual management, but I'd like to try to link the timing of the annual management things we do to what's blooming at the time. So I tried to do that. It's in that way, it's still a work in progress. They wanted me to cut so much out of it that I had to cut something, you know. So anyway, might as well start up, and I'll answer questions when it's done. So see you at the end. My presentation today is a year at French Hill Apiaries, where I like to show the management that we do. And instead of tying our management to the calendar dates, I'd like to at least try to link our management to bloom periods. Well, we're going to start in winter, of course, because winter here seems like it's a half a year all the time. So there's not a lot to do in the winter. Everything is covered with snow. There's my house and my old cow. And so the bees are all tucked away for the winter. And the snow piles up deep and deep and deep. And so what we do in the wintertime is work in the wood shop and build equipment, repair equipment, think, plan. A lot of the thinking goes on during the wintertime because there's not much else to do. So let's start in early spring. We're going to check the cluster size and the food levels of the colonies. So this is what I'm hoping to see. I'm hoping to see nice, large clusters, maybe with some honey. The one on the left, I can see honey around the cluster, so that one's fine. But what about the one on the right? That makes me nervous. And so I dig around with my hive tool and I look for some honey. And if this colony doesn't have any honey to eat, if I can't find honey, I need to feed them. We look for cluster size. This is a smallish cluster. I can see it goes down inside the combs. But it's a small cluster, and they have honey. This is a larger cluster, but things don't really look right. In fact, that cluster is dead because it's starved to death. So you see what happens is they started raising brood, and they used up all their honey before I could get around to feed them, and they starved. Well, in the wintertime, we can't really feed syrup. Feeding syrup in the winter before the bees can fly is just asking for issues with dysentery. And so in the winter when they can't fly, we feed them fondant if they're low on food, which is a soft sugar. We also feed them pollen substitute. Pollen substitute is a high protein patty used to supply them their protein that they need. And they really love it. They just suck it right down. Well, the reason we do this is the bees start raising brood in the spring. And they need protein. And the protein they use was stored last autumn. from goldenrod and asters and other fall blooming plants, and they preserve that pollen under honey. And then in the spring, there's protein available for them to raise babies. But what happens if they run out of protein? Then they stop raising brood. And a brood cessation in the spring is really a dangerous thing. The bees are getting old. They're starting to lose their field force as they work out in the field. And the colony population begins to dwindle. And they need to be replacing that population with new bees. But if they can't raise new bees because they have a lack of protein, the colony dwindles. It's called spring dwindling, and many colonies can die because of that. So we give them a protein to get over that hurdle until the first pollens are available. Now, some people don't like to use artificial protein, artificial pollen substitute, as it's called. So you can actually trap pollen and fill combs and put that full pollen comb next to the brood, and they'll use that instead of artificial pollen substitute. So finally, in March, we go from about November sometime until March or even April before there's a cleansing flight. And the bees can't defecate until they have a cleansing flight. And so they're going all winter long, and finally we have a day that's warm enough for them to have a general flight, and out they come, and out comes their defecate, and it's all over the place. Good day to wear a hat to the bee yard. Another thing they need at this time of year, remember, everything is frozen here. This is winter here in Vermont, and all the liquid is frozen. And they can't gather liquid. So they'll even, when it's a warm day on first cleansing flight day, they'll even land on the snow to try to suck up some of the melting snow. And so that first cleansing flight day, you can see what the snow looks like. It's covered with feces. But this is a good thing. And the first reel of water that's available to them is on the outer cover, on the lid. When the snow and the ice melt, and it's warm enough for the bees to fly, this is where they get their first drinks of water. And then the sugar makers, the sap starts to run in the maple trees, and the sugar makers are boiling it down, and now spring really starts to break. And now we can feed sugar syrup. So colonies that are light on feed, once they can fly regularly, once the bees can fly regularly, we can start feeding them sugar syrup. And it's the same thing as with pollen substitute and protein. If the bees run out of feed, or they start getting low on feed, they'll shut down brood rearing right at the wrong time of year when brood rearing needs to be increasing, not decreasing. Finally, before I start to get our first blooms, this is poplar. We call it poplar. It's not poplar. It's Populus tremuloides, which is quaking aspen. And it moves into alders. I believe you all have alders in the UK, in the British Isles. This is one of our very earliest pollens. And then it moves into the maple bloom. This is the first significant nectar flow. I've seen very many colonies on the brink of starvation get saved by the nectar flow from maple trees. So this is happening, April, middle of April to the end of April. And then the willows. Willows are probably the first really good pollen flow. And so in order to show you what I mean by a pollen flow, I took this colony and I plugged up the entrance with grass. So the bees would accumulate on the side of the hive. And oh my gosh, look at how much pollen is coming into this colony. So this is what I'm talking about. When we reach this point, we're pretty much over the winter. So once we've gone around and checked all the honey production colonies, we have to check the overwintered nucleus colonies. We run some days 500 or more nucleus colonies through the winter. And they're all wrapped up for winter, but we do the same thing. We open them up, we check them for feed, we check them for pollen substitute, make sure they have protein. And this is what we're looking for. These are the kind of colonies that I'm looking for. This is probably an 8-comb nucleus colony on each side, so there's 2 nucleus colonies here. Snow has just melted. The colonies are still wrapped for winter, and look at the population in those. And all of those colonies were made the previous summer with very limited resources and allowed to build up into these colonies and overwintered, and this is what we have in the spring. These are our heifers. There's another one. These are our heifers. You know, a dairy farmer, heifers are the replacements for the old cows. These are my heifers. These are my replacements for my old colonies. And then we have this other bloom. It's called coltsfoot. And I never believed coltsfoot was worked with by the bees, but it is. And look at that. Sometimes there's multiple bees on each flower. It's a wonderful plant. Now we can take our winter wraps off. So this is a production colony, all apiary, wrapped for winter. And this is a nucleus colony apiary wrapped for winter, beginning to be unwrapped. So we take the wrappers off. As we're doing this, I'm looking for signs at the entrance to the colony. Is the colony alive? Is it vibrant? Without opening this colony, I look at the cleanings that are coming out of the colony, and I know this is a good house cleaning colony that has the strength to clean up all the refuse that's gathered during the wintertime. This is an excellent thing. And we're looking for cluster size. This is a beautiful colony of bees that's come through the winter, packed with bees still in the spring. So once we've gone around and made sure everybody's got enough feed, we've got them unwrapped, now it's time to start supering. We need to get the supers on early. Our first major nectar flow is from dandelion, and this can be any time in the early to mid-May. And once this flow starts, if we don't have supers on, the nectar goes in the brood nests. And it plugs up the brood nest. And so that causes swarming. We need to get some nectar storage room above the active brood rearing cluster. And so this is how we do it. We get our supers on, gosh, in April sometime, you know, way before the flow. So now we've got supers on the production colonies so that if the flow comes and we're busy doing something else, the colonies aren't going to swarm. Now we're transferring all those 400 nucleus colonies into shipping containers because we sell a lot of them. And so here we are making up cardboard nuke boxes, checking for the queens. The queen has to go in the shipping box. If you don't actually actively spy that queen, there's a chance that the queen didn't go in the nuke, and then we get in trouble when we sell it with a queenless nuke. So. And we're setting up 10-frame colonies in Langstroths, making new colonies. And then we get our first major flow. So this is about the first half of May. And it's from dandelion. And everybody gets some dandelions. You all get dandelions. Everybody gets dandelions. Not dandelions like we get dandelions. I mean, when this nectar flow starts, it's like you died and gone to heaven. Look at that. And it's just everywhere. And the apples come on. And so you have this dandelion fruit bloom, as I call it. And this is the first major flow of the year. We can fill supers of honey on this flow. And because it's such a major flow, it can promote swarming. Now, what do you do about swarming? Swarming is all about population management. How to manage the population to to maintain strong, productive colonies, but in the meantime, they won't swarm. Like this, beautiful cluster. Or this, or this, or that, okay. So what can we do? Well, we could split the colonies. We can make an artificial swarm, or we can take a nuke out of the bees and brood away from the colony and give it more room and knock down the population and try to prevent these colonies from swarming. One of the ways that we employ to prevent swarming is it entails reversing the brood chamber and equalizing brood among the colonies. Now, a lot of you have single broods or brood in a super. Well, I can't run my bees on single broods and brood in a super. I need two broods in a super, because we have such an intense buildup in the spring that single broods and a brood in a super, that everything would be swarming. So we reverse the order of the boxes. So the top box is on the bottom and the bottom box is on top. Now, when do we do this? Well, we try to do this before the dandelion bloom. So let's see what we've done so far. A couple weeks before this, we added supers. And so the early nectar flows are going in the supers. Now, below those two supers is my brood nest with two broods and a super. Now, if we hadn't put those supers on there, the nectar comes in and it goes in the brood nest, right? It's like in a tree. When a colony is in a cavity in a tree, there's nobody to put supers on. There's nobody to manage the colony. The colony has gone up through the brood nest and is now at the top of the brood nest where the remainder of the honey is. And then the nectar comes in, and where are they going to put the nectar? Well, they're going to put it in the top brood box. But what else is in the top brood box? There's brood in the top brood box, but there's nowhere for them to store the nectar. So as the brood emerges, they store the nectar in the cells of the emerging brood. This sets up a competition between nectar storers and brood rearers. And it forces the queen down into the colony because the top is being packed with incoming nectar. And that downward pressure caused by that incoming nectar, when there's no supers on the colony, is the main key, in my opinion, for swarming. So that's what we're trying to do, number one, with early supering. That gives the bees a place for overhead nectar storage, so it doesn't go in the brood nest. But as the incoming nectar increases, we have to do something again to give overhead nectar storage and overhead room for the queen to lay. So we take the supers off, we lay the colony on the ground, we check the colony, we crack it apart, and we look at the bottom of the top box. That's where the brood nest is. And we're looking for swarm cells. And there they are. So you see what's happened is that even though there were supers on this colony, the strength of that incoming flow has kicked off swarm preparations. So now what do? We cut out all the cups, all the queen cups with eggs and larvae and queen cells, and we reverse the colony. Well, the boxes on the bottom are pretty much empty. And so when we reverse the colony, we're taking brood comb and putting it above the active brood rearing cluster, allowing the queen to move up. And it's that upward movement of the queen and her cluster that takes that pressure off, that swarming pressure. So we can raise gigantic colonies of bees and they don't swarm. And so now you see this colony has now been reversed. The brood nest order is reversed. The first two supers on are getting full, and we add another super. And as long as afterward, during the honey production time, as long as we keep ahead of them in supers, you know, it takes 2 supers of nectar to make 1 super of honey. And so they need extra storage room for all that nectar, because nectar is 85% water and honey is 85% sugars, and they have to get rid of that water, and that water is volume. So now we've done our second round of supering. So we supered once, we reversed, and we're supering again as we're reversing. And we're putting 1 or 2 more supers on, so now they have 4 supers on already, and it's only the middle of May. But this is what we need because our flow is so intense. So what have you accomplished in this reversing? Comb space above the cluster, so the queen can move up and that downward pressure is taken away. And nectar storage above the cluster, so that nectar isn't going in emerging brood, it's going out to the side and above, which is where it should be. Now, because we've got the colonies apart at this time of year, this is a great time to evaluate the queen. You sit down and you look at the brood. You're looking for queen cells anyway, and so now you can evaluate the quality of your queen. This is the kind of a brood pattern I'm looking for. I'm looking for this, this beautiful white pearly larvae. Every cell is full. Every larva next to another larva is almost the same age. The queen is laying, and she's just filling the comb space like this. That is a nice queen. And an unsealed pattern like that becomes a sealed pattern like this. And this is what we're looking for. This, on the other hand, is not so good. Empty cells, larvae of different ages, all mixed up together, no cohesive pattern. These need to be requeened. This is another example of a colony that needs to be requeened. You have old brood, young brood, empty cells, eggs, all scattered together. The queen is not laying in a nice circular pattern. She's all over the place. This colony needs to be requeened. This colony has a terrible pattern. Another one, shotgun pattern it's called. This colony needs to be requeened. And again, the queen isn't able to keep up. The pollen gatherers are coming in with this huge pollen flow. They plug the whole brood nest with pollen. The queen has nowhere to lay. This queen should have been replaced already. This one obviously should be replaced. This is a laying worker. This is a failed queen. There is no queen in this hive. The worker bees take over, start laying eggs. Of course, they're unfertilized, and only drones result in this. Colony needs to be requeened. Now, sometimes you'll find colonies that have multiple eggs in the cells, but that's because it's a new queen or a queen that doesn't have enough support staff, so she has to keep laying, but she can't expand her cluster. So this is how I tell positively that what I'm seeing is a drone layer. Is a laying worker. Queen cups with multiple eggs like this is pretty much definitive of the laying worker colony. And because we are now got the colonies apart and we're inspecting, we're evaluating the queens, this is a great time to do your first disease check of the summer. You want to see nice pearly white brood like this. You want to see sealed brood patterns like this. This is not what you want to see. This is sunken cappings, dead brood. This is American foul brood disease, one of the most deadly diseases, if not the most deadly disease we have. It's a spore-forming bacteria, and once the spores are in the hive, they're viable for 70 years or maybe forever, certainly a lifetime. And the only way to get rid of it is to burn it. So when you find American foul brood, you burn it. This is another brood disease called European foul brood. This is increasing in our region. I know you're having problems with it in the UK. This is also caused by a bacteria, but it's not a spore-forming bacteria. This is another disease. This is a virus called sac brood. The pupa gets a little sac around it. It's a virus. There's really nothing you can do except requeen the colony. This is a fungal disease called chalk brood. Requeening this colony with a hygienic strain of bees will eliminate the chalk brood, and you'll never see it again. So now we've gone through, we've supered, we've reversed, and we're in the dandelion fruit bloom, and it's time to start setting up our cell builders. And this is when we do it, dandelion fruit bloom. So the brood that I harvest to boost my cell building colonies into a massively strong colony so I can get the best queen cells I can get, I harvest brood from what I call brood factories, which are nucleus colonies whose entire reason for existence is to make me brood for setting up cell builders and for making nucleus colonies. So here's a group of 4 nucleus colonies that are getting very strong. It's right about the dandelion bloom, and I begin harvesting brood from them. Even though I harvest brood from them, they're still getting stronger and stronger. So this is a brood factory yard. And I go around from nuke to nuke, and I take a frame or 2 of brood away from each one. And I take enough so that they won't swarm before I get back there again, maybe in a couple of weeks, but not so much that they dwindle. And because I boost these colonies, that colony on the photo on the left is a real strong cell builder colony, and the queen right part is below the queen excluder, and the cell building part, before I graft into it, is above. And on grafting day, I separate it, and I shake the bees, the nurse bees, into my cell building unit, which is now queenless, but packed with bees. And so I put my graft into that. Do my graft for my breeder colonies. You know, I have a number of breeding colonies of queens that I like to graft from, that I'm trying to propagate their genetics. And and these queens all come from my own apiaries. I don't buy in queens. I don't buy in stock. I evaluate my bees, and I pick the best stock, local stock that grows in my apiary under my management, and that I've kept records for years. So once we've got the grafting done, the first round of grafting done, the day before the queen cells are ready to harvest, we have to set up the mating nucs. So these are the mating nucs. The way they've been overwintered. There's actually 2 boxes on each mating nuc, and my mating nucs are 4 ways, and that get reduced to 2 ways, and then put on top of another one. And so that I'm actually wintering each queen. There's 2 queens in each of those stands. Each queen has 16 combs. And we overwinter them that way, and then the day before the queen cells are ready, we break them back down into 4 ways, queenless 4 ways, and take them to the mating yard. And so here we are setting up setting up mating nucs from one of the groups of overwintered nucs. And now we're into more of the summer flowers, the summer flow. This one is honeysuckle. Great flow of very mild white honey. These are our brambles. I think your brambles are much later in the season. This is early June, and the brambles. And this is blackberry, gray pollen. I think you have gray pollen too over there, don't you? And because we make such huge, well-stocked cell builders, this is the kind of results we get on the queen cells. Enormous queen cells, still packed with jelly on the day we harvest the cells. Every one of those pupa got more jelly than it could possibly eat. And that's where I think quality comes in. So the first queens, our first queens are available every year. Let's see, June 13th, I believe, is pretty much every year. So the crew goes out and catches queens. We catch about, I think it's 128 every 4 days. And here's Kate and Tucka, and then here's Kirsten and our friend from Rhode Island. She's a Chinese national. And so lots of people come to visit us. Kirsten was the editor of American Bee Journal. So people come from all over the place and around the world to spend time with us as we're catching queens. And so here's a reasonably good catch for the day. Well, now that we have queens available, now we can start setting up our nucleus colonies for overwintering. So this is happening about the 14th or the 15th of June. And now we're into another summer honey plant. This is called sumac, staghorn sumac. Wonderful plant. A little bit finicky, but in the right weather, this makes a beautiful vanilla flavored honey. Orange pollen, really a nice plant. And our clovers, and our vetches, it's another legume, and alfalfa. And so now these are the brood factories. You know, even though we're taking brood out of them once a week, every other week, they get hugely populous. And you have to keep adding combs to them, or they're going to swarm, even though we take brood away. So now we have queens available to catch, queens on my table in the living room, and now we can start making our nucleus colonies. I like to make nucleus colonies on the main honey flow, which starts about middle of June and goes till about middle of July. See, we have 1 month of good honey flow. So I also like to get my nucleus colonies to draw foundation. So if I make these nucleus colonies up on the main honey flow, they'll draw out 4 or 6 frames of foundation over the summer, giving me new combs, which is invaluable in my operation. So we're pulling out frames of brood, setting up nucleus colonies. So we'll set up probably 350 nucleus colonies between middle of June and middle of July. We're using about 1.5 frames or to 2 frames of brood in the early made nucleus colonies. But once we get to the 1st of July, 4th of July, somewhere in there, we start making them a little bit stronger. See, I still want them to draw a foundation. But if we make them up in the early July and let them build up for a couple of weeks and then try to get them to draw foundation, what's happened is that the flow has ended and they can't draw foundation because they just aren't strong enough. So we make them a little stronger than 2 frames. We might use 3 frames of brood after the 1st of July, which really builds them into a nice colony, ready to go for the autumn flow. So now we have to do our 3rd round of supering. Well, what does this entail? Supering for comb honey. I want my comb honey basswood and sweet clover. And the sweet clover basswood flow is about the very end of June until the middle of July. So here's the linden trees, American basswood, Tilia americana. You call it lime. These are our lime trees. And so I try to get them, I want this honey in my comb honey. It doesn't crystallize. It's like eating candy. It's the most beautiful, flavorful honey for comb honey. White cappings. But it takes a real strong colony to make comb honey. This is the kind of apiary I use to make my comb honey. The pink boxes are comb honey boxes. Okay? So look at the bees. Look at the surplus bees in these things. This is what it takes to make comb honey. So now we've got our nucleus colonies made. We're done by the 10th or the 15th of July. We're still catching queens. We still have queens available. So now we do our midsummer requeening. We identify the colony to be requeened. Now why would that be? Poor brood pattern? A poor honey producer? I've got records over a number of years. We can follow these colonies and see that they're consistently making below the average crop in the apiary. Or chalk brood. Chalk brood is that brood disease, that fungal brood disease I showed you. The chalk brood is a very good marker for hygienicness. And so if a colony that doesn't show chalk brood when others do is an excellent candidate for breeding hygienic bees. And hygienic bees will rid the colony of brood disease before it becomes contagious. So we've identified our colony to be requeened, and now how do we requeen it? There's a number of ways. Direct introduction, well, we can use the mailing cage and pop the cork off the candy end and put them put that queen in the colony after we've dequeened that colony, and more often than not, they'll accept that queen. Well, you've removed the first queen, but is there a second queen in that colony that needs to be requeened? How many times does this happen, that you take the queen, but there was a second queen, and she will kill your introduced queen? Okay, you can also requeen with nucs, nucleus colonies. Very good way to requeen with nucleus colonies. Dequeen the colony, give it the nucleus colony with a laying queen, and they accept her very well. What we use mostly are push-in cages. Little wire cages that we can isolate the new queen on combs in the colony after the colony has been dequeened, and leave her there until she gets accepted and she can start to lay. So here's a frame of brood. We've removed the old queen from the colony. We locate a comb that has emerging brood and nectar. Brush all the bees off, locate the cage over emerging brood and nectar with no bees, put the queen under the cage and push the cage into the midrib of the comb, and put that colony back in the hive. Right back in the colony. Push the combs together, close it up. This queen stays there in that cage for 4 days. Why 4 days? When do eggs hatch? They hatch on the 3rd day. So if we leave that queen under that cage for 4 days, there should be no eggs in the colony, correct? So you pull the comb with the cage on it, and you look at the comb outside the cage. Are there any eggs? If there are eggs, guess what? You had a second queen in that colony, and she needs to be removed before you can redo the cage. This gives you a second chance. So here she is. The queen of the cage has been removed. The push-in cage has been removed. She hasn't been out among the general population for more than 30 seconds or a minute. And look at, they're already starting their retinue. They've already accepted her. Why is that? When you requeen with a caged queen, she's not a laying queen. She's a mated queen, yes. Is she a laying queen? No. As soon as I catch these nice fat queens and I put them in a cage on my table overnight, tomorrow morning they're skinny, short little things. They don't smell, they don't act like a laying queen, they don't smell like a laying queen. You put them in a colony, they come out of the cage, they don't act like a laying queen, and sometimes the bees object. But when she's underneath the cage for 4 days, she starts to lay, she plumps up, they feed her, and then, because now she's a laying queen, she's been brought into lay. Now when you remove the cage, she's a laying queen. The bees just accept her and love her right away. Well, sometimes it's not so easy to find the queen. You've been there. I mean, what do you do when you can't find the queen? Come back the next day? Well, do you have any better chance of finding her the next day? This is a typical thing. They're looking for a queen. Well, I mean, there's 4 people there looking for a queen in four different spots. I mean, really? Where is she? She's in there somewhere. Well, what I do is I made a shaker box. And a shaker box is no more than a serviceable brood box with a queen excluder nailed on the bottom. And I can take the colony down, right down to the bottom, take all the combs out, put my shaker box on top of the empty box down below, shake the bees into the shaker box and reinsert the combs, now beeless combs, underneath the shaker box, and the bees will go back down through the queen excluder to get onto the brood, leaving the queen and the drones behind, and there she is. Now we're into harvest, so we've done our requeens. We've done all our summer work. We've done all our requeens to try to replace any failing queens, any queens that are questionable. Now we're into honey harvest. Now, are we going to take it all? No, we're not going to take it all and feed back sugar. We could do that. But you see those dark bands in the top box? That's the bee's protein. That's the bee's protein that they need next spring. And if you take that box away and take their honey and just feed them sugar so they have enough carbohydrates, they don't have any pollen. And how are they going to raise any brood next spring to replace the bees that are dwindling? You need to leave that box on. So this is harvest. These are the kind of honey crops we get some years. 250 or more pounds of honey. Unfortunately, the deeps always seem to be on the top. And so it's a struggle to get them down. But at the same time you're doing harvest, now we have something we have to deal with that I didn't have to deal with when I was early in my career, Varroa mites. And so what do we do about this? You can't treat with honey supers on because it would contaminate the honey. So as soon as you get the honey off, you need to sample to find out what your Varroa populations are. And you need to treat with whatever it is you're going to treat with. This is a colony that's crashed from Varroa mites. You can see the poor bees died as they tried to come out. They're all full of virus. They don't have any wings. They have a short, flattened abdomen. The bee in the middle is pretty much what they're supposed to look like when they emerge from their cells. Long plump abdomen. Look at the other two. No wings, flat, stunted abdomen. This is caused by viruses, caused by Varroa mites. You need to treat your bees for Varroa mites, or whatever it is you do to mitigate this exploding Varroa population needs to be done. Now what we do is we sample. We sample about when we're doing our requeens. We do our sampling with an alcohol wash. And this little bottle here with the screens, you shake it, and we put 300 bees, shake it up in alcohol, the mites fall off, there should be on the bottom. This is what we're wanting to see. I'm wanting to see zeros. I don't want to see 5s and 10s and 15s and 30s. I want to see zeros. I know that our treatments are working over the year. I know our treatment is working if we find zeros. So then we get into the autumn flow. Loosestrife, purple loosestrife, a European plant. Goldenrod, boneset, all kinds of plants. Asters are huge. Goldenrod, wonderful plant. Knotweed makes a beautiful dark honey, and it's wonderful to winter on. Asters, we have a lot of different asters. This is maybe flat top. New England aster. Not sure of this kind, but it's a really good late pollen and sometimes nectar flow, which helps with our wintering. So now that's done with, and we have to do our winter preparations. First off, make sure you don't have any disease going into the winter, especially AFB. If you have AFB going into the winter, the colony dies in the winter, and in the spring your other colonies rob it out, taking the disease home, and now it spreads through your apiary. Never, never take an AFB colony into the winter. We want to check cluster sizes. We need to have big clusters going through our winters because we have such a long, cold winter. This is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for bee colonies that are hives that are packed with bees. Now we have to make sure they have enough feed. My colonies here in northern Vermont need 70, 80 pounds of honey. And how would I know that? How would I know there's 70 or 80 pounds of honey? Well, so when do we feed? We feed after the goldenrod flow is finished. So the goldenrod, when they're ripening goldenrod nectar, it has a very, very strong flavor, odor. Some people say that it smells like dirty gym socks. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't abide by that. I think it smells wonderful. I think it smells ka-ching, ka-ching, because this is winter weight for us. This is honey that's going to get our bees through the winter. So how much? Well, I'm feeding it, well, depending on what they need. And how will I know that? Because I have a target weight, and I weigh every beehive. So achieving the target weight, I use a scale. It fits on my hive stand. I tip the hive sideways, slide the scale underneath it, tip the hive up, and weigh the colony. And my two broods and a super with the bottom board and the crown board, or the inner cover if you will, need to weigh 155 or 160 pounds. And for every 10 pounds under that target weight, I give them 1 gallon of 2-to-1 syrup, 2 sugars and 1 water, 65% solution. And I feed it all. If they're 20 pounds light, I give them 2 gallons. I want to feed it fast. If you feed them with quart jars over a long period of time, they don't store any of it. They use it to raise brood. But when you feed it to them all at once, it comes in so fast, just like a nectar flow, that they can't use it. And in fact, by feeding the way I do, see, it gets pretty cold. It's been pretty frosty lately, and we're feeding bees. But by putting those cans on top of the combs, on top of the frames, the bees go up around the cans and they warm the syrup before they can take it down. So here's, we can feed up to 5 gallons. We can feed up to 50 pounds of syrup at once. And that will be gone in a week, in less than a week, and they just take it down. In fact, they'll cap it. They'll treat it like it was nectar. They'll cap it just like it was honey. You'll find wax flakes all over the entrance because the stimulation from the sugar is causing the bees' wax glands to work. And then we get our beautiful colors. This is pretty spectacular. This is my backyard. You know, our area is just noted for the flaming forest of the autumn colors. So now we've got our feeding done. We're going to have to wrap the colonies. Now, what do you mean wrap the colonies? Well, we put tar paper around them to absorb the heat from the sun, because that black wrapper will warm up the inside of the hive enough on a cold, sunny day in the winter that it'll just warm enough so that the bees can break the cluster a little, maybe bring some honey into the cluster, and so they don't get isolated and starve on one side of the hive with honey not very far away. But this actually might cause moisture problems because we're wrapping the colony up and sealing it all up. This is a colony that is wrapped. Okay. The bottom entrance, we put a screen in the bottom entrance for mouse protection. A 1/2-inch hardware cloth screen. We have an upper entrance to allow some of the water vapor to vent out of the colony. We have inner cover insulation, crown board insulation to prevent condensation underneath and having it drip on the bees. Remember, we're below 0 Fahrenheit. We're 20 below 0 Fahrenheit, and they make a lot of moisture in their you know, from eating that honey. They give off a pound of honey gives off something like 0.6 of a pound of moisture, and that moisture needs to go someplace. And the black wrapper, as I said, is for solar gain. So off to the bee yard with what we need to wrap an apiary. You know, the black wrapper, screen, little duct tape, these are the tools that we use to wrap the colony. Cut the piece of paper to fit around the colony, around the hive. So here's the hive we're going to wrap. And the crown board is just covered with burr comb from the summer, so we have to scrape that off and cover the crown board, the inner cover hole, and we put a piece of foam on this. Well, if that hole is open, the bees go up and they chew a hole in the foam. So we cover it with little duct tape. Now I've scraped the top, the crown board smooth so that the foam will sit on the wood, not up in the air on the burr comb. Then this is our mouse protection. It's a 1/2-inch hardware cloth wedge that fills the bottom entrance, and it's jammed into the entrance, the bottom entrance of the colony. And this allows plenty of ventilation, plenty of air ventilation to remove that excess moisture. Next. And this is what it looks like. Now this is our upper entrance. Now remember how much snow we get here. We can get 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 feet of snow in the wintertime. The snow will be burying the colonies. The bottom entrances are iced over. There's no way that the bees are going to come out. Well, what happens if we have a nice warm day in the middle of the winter, warm enough for the bees to fly and have a cleansing flight? You know, bees can't defecate till they can fly. They don't do it in the hive. Well, if I didn't have that upper entrance and the bottom entrance was iced over, the bees would never be able to take a cleansing flight until snow melt. So this is what we do. And we put the wrapper on, staple it on with a few staples. This is the upper entrance. You see the bees are already looking out the upper entrance, already saying what's going on. And here's your colony all wrapped up and ready for winter. A little bit of a forward tilt so it won't, so water won't collect on the bottom board. And here's a nice colony that's all wrapped up, ready to go. Sometimes we get an early snowstorm, and we like to try to wrap the bees before snow. So we had this one, it was a couple years ago, we got 2 October snowstorms of over 1 foot. So we had to dig out everything, clean everything off, and then wrap. And you know, they do all right like this. And I just wanted to say, you know, I'm never too worried about my bees in the winter because I have the old man of the mountain watching over them. So here we go again. Now we're back into winter. Everything is freezing up. Here's our first snow of the year. The pond isn't even frozen yet. And the birds, these are our winter birds, little chickadees, like your little tits. And when we really get some snow, and then the snow starts to pile up, and now we're working back in the shop again.
All right, Mike, thank you so much. This was a great presentation.
Great, I'm glad you liked it.
Okay, are you ready for questions?
Well, I was born ready.
Okay. Uh, when do you place your spring pollen patties?
Sometime between the middle of March and first good pollen flows in April. So it really depends on the weather, how the spring is progressing. If it's still real cold and snowy, and we won't bother, but sometimes towards the end of April we start to do yards, and we try to get done early as April as possible, because once you have a good pollen flow coming in, they won't touch the sub.
Okay, can you reverse your deeps before dandelion bloom?
Yeah, we try to do it just a bit before dandelion bloom, but not too far before dandelion bloom. You know, where I am, don't forget, I mean, 3 years ago, our first pollen came in on April 20th. And then then the dandelion flow is about before May 15th, you know. So come on, we've had pollen for 3 weeks and the dandelion is going. So, you know, it really depends on all of that.
Okay, do you recommend the foam over a quilt box wintering a hive?
See, I think for me, the foam is my quilt box, sort of. It's my insulation, as would be the shavings in a quilt box. The quilt box, I think, is designed to absorb moisture, and I don't want to absorb moisture. I want to vent moisture. When you absorb moisture into the quilt box, and correct me if I'm wrong, but don't the shavings get wet? And wet insulation is no insulation. So I found, and I used to use supers of shavings or leaves or whatever, but I always taped the inner cover hole. So I think it's two things working against each other. I think if you're going to use a quilt box, you put the quilt box on to do what the quilt box does. And if you want to use foam, then you don't use the quilt box. You just put the foam on directly on the inner cover, and leave a upper entrance, a small upper entrance. I'm talking about an inch by 3/8, just enough to release some of the moisture. I find it's better that way than trying to absorb it.
Okay, do you ever use queen excluders between your brood boxes and supers?
No, I never do. I think I want, as I raised more queens and got better at it and better at selection, my queens got more prolific. And if I leave honey supers on, it seems like I think I'm selecting for the most prolific queens, because they're all hanging in the trees. So I like to give my colonies an unlimited brood nest. So if that queen, you know, even though we're reversing, and you know, so we put this 2 supers on early, so you know the queen is going to go in the bottom super. Well, I don't care, because if she feels she needs to go in the bottom super and lay, go for it. You know, I can deal with it later. I can even reverse my supers later on and get a full super on the brood nest and the other supers above, and the brood will hatch and they'll fill it with the flow from later in the season. But I can't change it if they're already swarmed, so I don't use excluders.
Do you use an upper entrance on your honey supers?
No, I don't. I close the upper entrance off for the summer. Bees don't like to put honey anywhere near an entrance. So if you have an entrance, you'll have empty comb space anywhere near that entrance, even if it's just an auger hole. I can see it all the time in nucleus colonies. So in the top box in the nucleus colony, if we don't close that auger hole off when they're expanding in, say, July, August, if we don't put tape on that upper auger hole, all near that hole will be nothing there. It'll be empty comb space. So if I have a comb honey super on and there's like a crack that the bees can enter, an entrance of some kind anywhere, like
under that honey super because the box didn't fit correctly or there's a crack or something, they won't fill those cells. They won't fill those combs at the end. It'll be empty and it'll ruin the comb honey. So I make sure I don't have any entrances in the honey supers. I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the emery shim or having a easier way for the field bees to get into the supers. Well, guess what? The field bees don't go in the supers and unload. They go in whatever entrance they go into. They give it to a receiver bee in the hive, and then they fly off and get more nectar. So what's the difference if they're coming in the bottom entrance? They give it to a receiver bee and take off for another load, and the receiver bee goes and puts it somewhere. So nope, I don't like entrances anywhere near my honey supers.
A few questions on the bottom entrance in the wintertime. So they want to know if you use any sort of entrance reducer.
I use no kind of an entrance reducer. I like to have my entrance wide open with that 1/2 inch hardware cloth wedge. I think that restricts the airflow too much within the colony, within the hive. And so even though you have an upper entrance, if you have a restricted bottom entrance, that limits how much ventilation, how much airflow is in that hive. So I like to have it wide open. I find no problem with that. I don't think they get too cold. I think it keeps them drier. I've seen entrance reducers that were stuffed into the bottom entrance, with the entrance notch up like you're supposed to do for winter, and the hive was wet because that's all they had was that little restricted entrance in the bottom, and you pull that entrance reducer out and a flood of water comes out of the hive. So no, I don't. Moisture is a real issue here, and it depends on where you are. If you're in the far north like I am, moisture is a real issue.
Okay, if you have an unexpected dearth during the summer because of drought, would you be feeding?
Yeah, if I had a backyard apiary, I might. What happens is when you have a dearth like we did this past summer, brood rearing slows or shuts down. Slows, I'll say. And so there, you're not building population. But guess what? You probably have Varroa mites. Everybody has Varroa mites, and if you haven't kept them down to zero, near zero, and you have a population building up, and then you have a limited brood production, guess what? All those mice are going to go into that limited amount of brood, and the damage is going to be maybe unrecoverable from. So yeah, if I didn't have 1,000 hives of bees or whatever it is, I just can't do it. I cannot go around and feed at that time of year. There's too much else to do. But yeah, I would if I thought it was reducing brood production. I would definitely give them enough syrup, not to put it in the supers. You don't want to do that either. So there's a fine line there between what are you going to do? Put supers on, put feed on with supers. So no, I can't do that.
Do you ever use screen bottom boards?
I never have used screen bottom boards. I can see the good and the bad of screen bottom boards, but I'm not going to change over all my hives to put screen bottom boards on them. It would be a huge expense for me. And I winter great. I've had in the last 10 years, I've had 2% losses and 6% losses and 35% losses and 20 and the old good old 15% losses, which look pretty good nowadays. So and that's all with solid bottoms. So
okay, of course there's a ton of questions about mites. How do you check for mites, and then what do you do about it?
So yeah, we do alcohol wash as I showed you in the film. I'd like to get going, at least make some kind of an early check, at least a random kind of a check. And then depending on what's going on, we sample again in the summer sometime. I can't really treat with supers on, and there's nothing I can do. I can use formic acid with supers on, but the mites all laugh at me and call me stupid because it doesn't really seem to work very well. I've done it twice now with supers on and got zero control. Perhaps because the cavity is so large that it weakens the strength of the fumes. I don't know. So if we have high mite loads in the spring, we try to treat in the spring and then hold off until we take the honey off in August, and try to treat as soon as we take the honey off in August. Treating sampling early in the spring is a little bit iffy. For instance, I don't know about you all, but did you have a tough Varroa year? I hear everywhere everybody's having a tough Varroa year. Well, we started sampling at the end of March. You know, we're looking at the bees anyway, and into the middle of April. And every sample we did was zeros. The inspector came out in May, at the end of May, and looking at nucs and making sure we can sell nucs, and all the samples were zeros. We're feeling pretty proud of ourselves. We got into the middle of July when we're going to be doing our requeens, start the first yard requeens, 10, 15, 30, uncountable numbers of mites. I don't know what happened there. How did they go from zeros to 10s and 30s and 50s? Boy, I don't know. So then it was like stop requeening and treat. You know, get the honey off as fast as we can and start treating. So we lost a bunch of bees, but I think we recovered. So what do we treat with? The only thing I found, I've used formic failure twice with mite counts. Okay. Oxalic vapors 3 times, 2 years when they were broodless late in the season. Then the next year when the mite loads were so high that you know, the three times a week apart or whatever it was. Now they're saying more often than that, but you know, mite counts of 20 turned to after 3 treatments and a week to wait. Mite counts of 20 turned into mite counts of 20. So I gave up on that. The only thing I found that works consistently is Amatraz, Apivar. It's the only thing I can find that I have. I can treat 1,000 colonies, or you know, 600 or 700 production colonies, and 700-800 nucleus colonies. So that's what I use.
How much honey do you consider a good harvest for one of your production colonies?
I like to see overall, I like to see 100-pound average. At 100-pound average, I'm doing pretty well. 2 years ago, we had a very good honey crop. We made 120 something pound average. We had apiaries, some of them in New York. Clinton County has done well for me. No, please don't move your bees from Florida to Clinton County anymore, please. But anyway, we made some yards over there made 145-pound average. So we had apiaries that had 5 and 6 supers on them, full medium supers, you know, 240 pounds of honey. But if I can make a 100-pound crop year in and year out, boy, I'm just happy about it.
All right, a couple of queen questions. What are your thoughts on transferring 14-day laying queen versus 28-day?
I'm not sure what that means. Are you talking about 14 days after? Oh, that's probably what it means. It probably means 14 days after she starts to lay, or 14 days after the cell was put in.
I think probably laying.
Yeah, probably cell was put in, or 28 days after the cell was put in. So 28 days after the cell was put in, you're going to see the sealed brood pattern. You're going to know if it's all worker. Will anything be hatching yet? I am probably not. At 14 days, you're just barely seeing eggs. So when we put our cells in day 10 after graft, and then we catch the queens 16 days after putting the cells in, it's we can see that most of the queens are starting to lay on day 11 or 12 after the cell went in. And so there are young larvae. There's a nice pattern of young larvae and eggs. Nothing sealed yet. With my mini nucs, if I wait for a brood to seal and start to emerge, they wouldn't be long in that box. They'd swarm or abscond from the heat. But also, the stronger they get, the less likely they are to accept my cell and raise their own. So we catch on day 16 after putting the cell in. So that, I mean, that's the right. If I had standard size frames, say in 4 or 5 frame nucs, whatever, 6 frame, whatever it is, and not little four mini comb nucs. And I wasn't catching the queens. Yeah, I think you should leave them in longer, and so you can evaluate the pattern of that queen. I really can't. I really don't have time for that. You know, we're catching 128 mating nucs every 4 days. So if we let them go to 28 days, oh my gosh, there'd be swarms hanging all over the place.
Do you prime the cell cups with royal jelly, and where do you get it?
I don't prime the cell cups with royal jelly. I make my cell builder so strong that there's just an abundance of jelly. But I use the Chinese grafting tool, which has a very flexible tip on it. And I graft larvae that are about 12 hours old is the youngest I want to go. I just said something today on Facebook, but so I have a breeder hive that I put a comb into the queen section of that breeder hive 5 days before graft, and there's nothing else in that 3 comb cavity that the queen is in that she can lay in except for my comb. And so they clean it and warm it and polish it up, and she starts to lay. So on grafting day, there's a nice pattern of maybe some slightly older larvae in the middle, but eggs all around the outside, and right in the sweet spot between the two are all these beautiful larvae about 12 hours old. So then I look for the ones that have a nice puddle of jelly. There's a nice 12-hour-old larva. It's bigger than an egg. It's still kind of clear. It's not all white yet. You can't see the segments so well. If your eyes aren't good, you pretty much know it's there because it's floating on a puddle of jelly. So with the grafting tool, it's picking up the jelly, not the larva. That's the advantage, I think, of the Chinese grafting tool, is that when you graft with it, it slides under the puddle, not under the larva, and you've got the larva floating on a puddle of jelly. And when you deposit it in the bottom of the cup, you're depositing a puddle of jelly with the larva floating on it. It's the best way I can describe it. So I don't really need to prime. It's already got the jelly.
Okay, what's a small hive beetle situation in Vermont?
Pretty good. The only time we see beetles is when somebody brings in bees from down south that's got beetles. I can tell when somebody near me's bought a bunch of bees that all of a sudden I see some beetles. Or I can tell when that guy comes back from almonds and blueberries and it winters in Georgia and Florida that, yeah, he's back in town. I really wish they could do something about this, you know. I don't know how. I don't have the answer. But for instance, I have a place over in Clinton County, and like we harvested the honey in Vermont last summer. Did all the Vermont yards. It all goes in the hot room. We extract it as fast as we can. First in, first out. Never see a beetle. Go over to New York. Harvest a few yards there. Some of it got sat in the hot room a little bit longer than maybe it should have, but Vermont was cool. It was clean. Guess what? Beetle larvae all over the place, sliming. You know, people are moving their bees up north, and I can tell when they come back. You know, moving in next to me, but other than that, you know, then in the springtime you don't see any beetles. You don't see any beetles till the migratories or the packages or the nucleus colonies start coming up from down south. Then you see beetles for a while. As long as you keep the honey out of your hot room quick enough, really it's no issue. I've never seen an issue in a beehive. Never seen them take over a beehive. But the hot room is an issue.
Have you ever had your bees abscond, and what do you think is the cause?
Yes, I have seen the bees abscond. This seems to be a real popular topic right now, absconding. And so people's bees die, and they see right now or in December, they see there's no bees in the hive. Full of honey, not a bee to be found. What's happened to my bees? Well, so many people are now saying they absconded. No, they didn't abscond. They flew. They died from Varroa mite viruses, and they left the hive one bee at a time. Eventually over time, and that's what it looks like. But absconding, sure. I've seen. I used to have a real issue with nucleus colonies absconding. Especially when I tried to keep them in single-story 4-frame nucs, double boxes. Boy, I'd do everything I could. I'd take brood out. I'd put comb or foundation in. I'd make more nucs out of those nucs, and they'd get to that time in the hot dog days of summer, and the goldenrod is starting to be stinky and like that, and you can stand right there and watch them go, and away they go. And you just looked at these things a few days ago, and there was no queen cells. All right, so if there's no queen cells, you're good for a while, right? Well, so then here goes this colony, and I say, well, wait a second. So I look at it, and there's no queen cells. They just flew away. Well, what happened is that the cavity, they couldn't cool the cavity off. Got so hot in there that they're clustered on the outside. They're even starting bits of wax on the outside. Finally, they just can't cool it off enough, and away they go. Well, suppose you didn't see it happen. How would you know that they didn't just swarm? Because when you go back there, say you go back there a week after, well, you're going to find there's still population. All the bees, it's hot now, right? So all the brood didn't die. The brood is emerging. There were field bees in the field when the abscond left. They're all back in the hive now. So there is a population. They are taking care of the brood, but the population can't possibly have raised all that brood. And there's emergency cells. Well, if they had swarmed, there would have been swarm cells. So that's what an abscond looks like. But I can't buy the abscond thing in the autumn and in the late autumn or early winter. Just hear it all the time. Oh, my colony was booming with bees just 2 weeks ago, and now there isn't a bee in it. Well, almost always there's going to be brood left over, like that photograph I had with a little bit of brood that tried to hatch and it died, and you pull them out and they have no wings. It's Varroa mites. It's not absconding. Now, I've heard of absconding, from mice. I've heard of mice making bees abscond, but the ones I've seen were nucleus colonies that got too hot. The solution was to put more boxes on to increase the size of the cavity so they could cool it off. So that's what I did, and that's why we're building them up into 3, 4, sometimes 5-story nucleus colonies.
All right, I think you just answered this question coming up, but they ask, if you don't use upper entrance in a honey super, how do you manage ventilation in hot weather?
The bees manage ventilation in hot weather. They've got it down really well. If you see hot weather and the bees are fanning, and they're bringing in air on one side of the bottom board, and they're directing air out on the other side of the bottom board, and they got themselves all lined up in there, and they direct it all the way up through, and they've got a pathway for all that air, and it goes right back out the upper entrance. So if you think not, you take your smoker and almost let the smoke come out very, very carefully, very, very light pressure, and on one side of the bottom board, you'll see that the smoke will come out. The moving air will push the smoke out. And on the other side of the bottom board, you just give it that little bit of and it'll suck it right in for about 1 instant. And all of a sudden they put the brakes on and they turn it around and it all comes flying back out again. So an old beekeeper once told me that the bees need pressure within the hive in order to be able to do that. And if you got cracks and holes all over the place and supers pushed back to aid in ventilation, you're defeating the purpose, you're defeating the job that the bees are doing. So I've always done it that way and I've always had good success at it.
Okay, if you requeen for disease like sac brood or chalk brood, do you remove the open brood too?
Nope, I just requeen. You know, like chalk brood. One time I sent 400 hives to Florida in '98, and they came back rotten with chalk brood, stinky rotten with chalk brood. I requeened all the chalk brood colonies with carneolans I got from California that had been selected for hygienicness. And I swear a month later, I mean, there were piles of mummies on the bottom boards. A month later, once that new queen's bees took over, I could not find a mummy. And to this day, I think my bees are very hygienic. And that's the reason. Because after that, now we're using chalk brood as the marker. We're not using liquid nitrogen. We're using chalk brood as the marker. So one cell of chalk brood in a colony, it takes it off the possible breeding list. We will be starting with liquid nitrogen this summer. We got a SARE grant to run a breeding program with the University of Vermont Bee Lab, and so we're going to be selecting high hygienic, looking for VSH traits, nosema. They're going to do nosema counts and virus loads, and then I've got my standard selection criteria that I go with: honey production, temper, patterns, and all like that. So I've never really used nitrogen. I've always used the chalk brood marker, but I think the chalk brood marker is very good.
Okay, how long is your queen rearing season and how do you build up your winter bees?
My queen rearing season, I set the first cell builders up on May 9th. First graft is May 19th. First queens are ready May 29th. First cells are ready May 29th. First queens are ready June 13th. Tell I've done this for a while. Yeah. First queens are ready June 13th. Last queens are ready August 4th or August 8th, depending on how many rounds we go.
Do you see robbing and how do you deal with it?
I do see some robbing. So we try not in the robbing season, dearth, or when there's no flow on, or when the goldenrod flow stops. We try to make sure we don't leave anything exposed, not even for a minute. Everything has to be covered with cloths, covered with inner covers. Sit on a rim of some kind so they can't go under. It becomes a real issue when we're catching queens. When we're catching the late July, early August queens before there's no goldenrod, that starts around the 10th of August here. So we're right in that time when there's no, if there's a flow on, open the mating nucs, you leave them open, you can leave them open, bring me the comb with the queen, no problem. Boy, I'll tell you what, you leave it open for 10 seconds and there's 500 bees trying to get in that poor little mating nuc. So everything has to be covered. We have bags, we cover everything with cloths. And I mean, immediately take the cloth up, you pick the comb out, you put it in the holding box, you put the cloth back on. And even then we have issues. So yeah, I don't use robbing screens. I try to keep my bees strong. But also, I think there's an issue with, I think Italians are wicked good robbers. That's one of the things they really do. They know just what to do. And so, you know, I don't really have Italians anymore. Once I got away from that, I think they're better at not robbing.
Yellow jackets?
No, not really a problem as long as the colony is strong. We don't really have such a population here that they're going to invade a strong colony and wipe it out. So they're really going after weak colonies. So we try to keep them strong or unite them or whatever.
Okay, have you tried overwintering in single deeps versus double deeps?
I've done nucleus colonies in single deeps. You know, so how do you get them to a single deep? So are they in the single deep all summer and then the excluder and then you got the supers and then you take the supers off and take the honey off and then let them fill up with autumn flow or winter or feed them? Well, as I showed that picture, you've lost your pollen. A lot of your pollen will be in the top deep. I'm trying to build population for winter, but they also need to store their food for winter. So how do you build population for winter if they're storing winter food in the brood nest? This stupid dog. And so I think that's an issue. So I like to have a big one. I don't just even have a double. I have a double and a medium super. That's my brood nest. I know that they can store ample amounts of honey and build a big cluster of winter bees.
Okay, one more question. Are your nukes overwintered in 2 deep boxes?
Actually, well, my nukes are 2 in a 10 frame lang, right? And so each side of the divider has 4 combs. And so most of my overwintered nucleus colonies, especially the June made, have three supers, 4 over 4 over 4. The ones later in the season, they pretty much are going to winter on 4 over 4. I used to winter on single 4-comb nucleus colonies, single story, and move them onto the inner cover of production hive for winter. I gave up doing that. It's a lot of moving, and there's a lot of issues with absconding and swarming if you try to keep them on 4 combs or 5 combs. So I just build them up. I give them whatever they need, and I have a much better success at that.
All right, well, thank you again.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming.